Product management at a startup versus product management at a Fortune 500 enterprise. What's the difference? I'm Laura. I'm a product manager specializing in B2B SaaS. Let me explain. During my career, I've managed more software products than I can count. And I mean that literally. Every time I try to make a list, I always forget something somewhere. And it's been a really varied bunch of products, lots of different kinds of products for lots of different kinds of organizations. So when someone asked me to explain the difference in doing product at software startups versus big traditional enterprise, it got me thinking. That question does tend to come from an assumption that big companies just give you lots of resources, lots of people and money and time, and you just kind of do whatever you need to do. And that really isn't necessarily the case. So here's some insight on the differences and similarities of managing all sorts of products. First up, resources. Everyone knows that resources at a small, young company are tight. There's not a ton of money. You don't have a stable customer base yet. Maybe the investment runway is pretty tight. And there's only a few handfuls of people across the entire company. So if you're willing and able to wear multiple hats, jump in wherever you're needed, that's priceless because there's often not an assigned person for every single task. You really do have to be scrappy. Now, there seems to be an assumption that folks working in huge companies have all the world's people and money at their disposal. And no, the company has billions of dollars and the company has tens of thousands of people, but those resources are spread across a ton of products and initiatives. They're spread really thin. So you end up expected to produce enterprise level results with very unrealistic budgets and tiny teams. I will say that if your product or initiative is considered critical to the company, the resources really are there. And so is the pressure. But if you can handle that, you can do amazing things. On the whole, though, that's not usually what you're getting. What you do have in a larger environment is what I call support infrastructure, which is really great. So what I mean by that is if your laptop breaks, there's someone to fix it. If your travel arrangements get messed up, there's someone to fix that. If you need expertise in a specific subject area, there's someone at the company who can help you out with that. It's really great. I miss it when it's not there. Now, if you need outside help, like a design agency, a dev shop, a PR firm, even just one-off contractors, large companies have what they call preferred vendors, and that's the vendor they've decided you're going to use. You can get, the vendor that you want, but you will have extra hoops to jump through. Having said that, it can be helpful to have some of that research done for you. A robust procurement department is part of that support infrastructure. Startups, on the other hand, they're a lot more likely to just give you leeway in selecting the best tools or vendors for the job. You might be kind of out there on your own, taking accountability for that decision on your own, but you can do it. Access to users. Now, this is huge for product managers, right? We are experts not only on our products, but our customers and users. We drive requirements, features, enhancements, updates, everything based on what customers and users need. And to do that, we talk to them as often as possible. We conduct surveys and polls and collect input from other customer-facing departments, right? We do all these things to find out about our users. And at a smaller company, you can do that. You might have challenges getting in front of your customers, right? It's not always easy. You might have to incentivize them for their time, but you can make it happen. No one's really stopping you most of the time. In a much bigger company, if you have an internal product that you're running, you can get in front of your customers because they're your coworkers. So you walk down the hall and say, hey, I want to pick your brain. It's usually pretty easy. But when a traditional company has an external facing product, you don't necessarily get as much information on that sort of stuff. Now, my experience is mostly in the B2B space, where you're going to have big contracts that are very closely guarded by territorial sales reps. They don't want you talking to their customers. It's very frustrating. I also have spent time in pharma, where, of course, there's huge privacy implications. You can't just go talking to patients. Marketing teams will do thorough research, but they're not necessarily going to dig into the questions that you need answered. And they don't even always provide you access to the research they do have. You have a lot of politics, basically, getting in the way of proper research, like a lot. And there are a lot more voices dictating what to do and how to do it. And those voices are less likely to be your actual users, and they're more likely to be execs or folks from other teams. Pacing. This is another big one that I think there's a lot of assumptions that big companies work more slowly than fast companies, and fast companies have to do a lot more hustle, things like that. And the truth is, I have seen all kinds of paces at all kinds of companies. The difference is really in the effectiveness. So large enterprise will keep people working against tight deadlines, but those timelines tend to be kind of arbitrary. It's launch before the end of the fiscal year, or, my personal favorite, just pick any date and work towards that. And then the deadline changes because it was kind of arbitrary. And so, some executive changes it on a whim, whatever. There's a lot of hurry up and wait, and that rushing doesn't necessarily drive faster results. There's also a very maddening budget process in which you can't get money for a big project until it's approved during a certain time of year. And then if it is approved, the money doesn't show up until the following year. It's not a good setup for any kind of modern software development. And it means that there's, again, a lot of waiting while you're trying to show results with the money that you don't have yet. Very, very frustrating across the board. And because there's so many different things going on at a large organization at any given time, there's a lot more project management overhead. So there's a lot more coordination and interaction among products and teams and roadmaps. You might be dealing with a PMO telling you how to do the nuts and bolts of your job. So a lot of the fast pace that you're seeing at these bigger organizations is just going into coordination work instead of actually benefiting the product directly. There was a time when I was tasked with building a product that would be shown at a convention. So great, not an arbitrary deadline. The deadline was the event, right? But when the request actually got to me, there were only 7 weeks before the convention started. And we had to go from requirements to full launch at this 100-year-old traditional company. And to top it all off, the key stakeholder was in Europe, and this was the summer. She was gone for about 4 of those 7 weeks, but also she had to approve every aspect of the design and functionality. There was just poor planning by very, very senior leadership and a very, very hierarchical work structure. And all of that combined to create this serious time crunch. We had to pull a couple all-nighters. It was rough. Did I build a functioning product in that time? You bet I did. Am I proud of that product? No, absolutely not. It could have been so much better. Now, smaller companies tend to move fast because they have to. You have to drive revenue and customer acquisition in order for the company to survive and grow. You have to show results to keep investors excited. And a smaller team means more focus, goals and deadlines that change less often. And when they do change, there's usually a good reason behind it. So you have a faster pace to get to something good as opposed to a fast pace only to start all over again or have your initiative canceled. Now, that's not to say that every startup is super efficient. I have definitely seen companies that rush toward a semi-arbitrary deadline and they never quite launch. In those cases, the problem is usually that they haven't defined what their product is. They don't know what done looks like. And this is especially common in really early stage startups in the pre-seed or seed stages when they're still working on their MVP. The founders maybe haven't quite found their footing yet. Product impact and support. This is where I see the biggest difference between the software product that a software startup sells and a software product at a large traditional corporation. At a small, young startup, the product pretty much is the business. You sell one thing. You might have tiered access or some additional services, but everything is based around that one product. So it's vital to the success of the company. It's maybe a small pond, but every fish is really big. The company therefore puts a majority of its resources into R&D and design and build and supporting the product. The product and engineering teams sit at or near the top of the organization. They have major voices and empowerment, or at least they should. At a Fortune 500, there's hundreds, maybe even thousands of products. Most of them are internal. They're supporting various business functions. These days, many or most of them are third party, but there's still a lot of custom in-house products. And with few exceptions, these products enable specific business processes that might help one or two teams. They are very, very small fish in a massive ocean, so they get more limited resources. They're often managed by someone in IT who doesn't have a seat at that proverbial decision-making table. Plus, when the company does a push to reduce custom apps, those little support products, they're the first to go. Now, traditional companies do offer, obviously, external-facing software products. Those are usually some form of sales enablement or marketing. They're still not the core product or service that the company sells. So product management for those can be a mixed bag. I worked for one company that put significant resources into its huge global compliance enabling website, which additionally housed a number of other apps for various audiences. So it was really this big complex portfolio all encased in a website. And they maintained tight ownership and control that enabled a smooth customer experience. They spent significant money on technical leadership as well. This was a portfolio that I managed, and it was an absolute pleasure and joy. It was one of my favorite jobs ever. Another company took those infamous corporate silos to an absolute extreme. Every part of their website and every customer-facing tool was owned by a different department. It was designed by a different agency, developed by a different vendor. So the result was whatever department had extra budget sitting around, they got to do what they wanted, and the rest of the experience suffered. One thing I will note is that traditional companies, and especially traditional B2B companies, are not always as advanced as their smaller, younger cousins when it comes to software management. So product managers in those organizations often don't even hold PM titles, even as they're doing the work. And they may find themselves having to be evangelists for modern product management itself, convincing executives that it's necessary and deserves resources. I do see this changing. There are a lot of companies now that are rolling out product manager titles, and they're almost swinging too far the other way, where everyone's a product manager, no matter what you do. But it's good to see that this is evolving a little bit. So what's the bottom line here? Organizations, both large and small, huge and tiny, handle product in their own way, with pros and cons to all of them. I have found it uniquely valuable to have experience working with all sorts of different organizations in all kinds of different industries, because each has taught me something that I'm able to bring to other jobs and clients. And while there are definitely a lot of differences in products and how they're managed at different kinds of companies, there are more similarities than there are differences, and that's how it should be.